Good morning, welcome to Tribal Jazzman Scholar. I want to talk about a phenomenon called synthetic thought. It's also called mythopoetic thought. It's the way that anthropologists have described the thinking patterns, the cognitive processes of tribal peoples, indigenous nature-based peoples. There seems to be, across the board, universally among traditional peoples, a way of organizing reality in which there are not clean distinctions between myth and tangible reality, between symbol and object. So they engage in what has been referred to as synthetic thought. I think Charles Herberger in The Thread of Ariadne was one of the first to describe it that way. But some of its features are that if in a tribal society and indigenous nature-based peoples, if they create something that we would call an image of something else, like if they were to paint a bison on a cave wall or to carve a goddess figurine out of ivory, that whereas our perspective would say, well, that's the symbol of the thing. In an indigenous way of thinking, in a tribal cosmology, there is not a distinction between the image and the thing. Once they have rendered something, that becomes the thing. And it's hard for us to grasp, because us being Western non-tribal peoples, because we don't do that anymore. That's not normally the way we structure reality. We tend to compartmentalize our supernatural spiritual lives into perhaps a regular church-going or other religious ceremonial context, whereas for nature-based peoples, it's an ongoing lived reality. And I just wanted to comment on the human brain and some of the aspects of the lateralization of the brain that might relate to this, and some aspects of child development that might give a hint to this as well. There is a phenomenon in early childhood, from the age of about 2 or so, when children can speak, till about the age 9, when there's the existence of imaginary friends, belief in a tooth fairy, a Santa Claus, an Easter bunny, things that we consider to be non-literal, that children believe in literally. And this has been referred to as magical thinking by various psychologists. And there has been a common response to that among Piaget and Erickson and others to try to understand, why do kids do this thing that's so irrational? What is this function? And the general agreement is that let's get them out of magical thinking as soon as we can, because it's really not that we want to spoil the belief in the Santa Claus or whatever it is that kids might do, but there's a sense that it's sort of a bit of a burden, having kids believe in things that aren't there. So, but there have also been others who have said, well, maybe that this has a function. This particular magical thinking is something that is an evolved response, an evolved mechanism that allows us eventually to have some other quality as an adult. And I would argue that tribal peoples who have what we call mythopoetic or mythical thinking, that's the natural evolution out of magical thinking into mythical thinking, where the brain can be compartmentalized between rational, linear, sequential thought, as in, let's prepare to migrate to the next camp over the next 3 months, and let's pack our gear, and but then in the evenings, let's have our rituals to call in the spirits that will guide and protect us, and that there's this very simple transition from one to the other. Whereas, as I said earlier, we tend to compartmentalize our spiritual life from our practical daily living life. But not so in indigenous cultures. There is this kind of a synthesis. I encountered it my very first time reading in an anthropology course in college on cognitive anthropology, and I was fascinated with that idea, and I was trying to stretch my own thinking to grasp what the implications of that were. And in a course on hieroglyphic writing, a very small seminar, 2 students and a professor, we were engaging in a kind of an in-depth study of hieroglyphic writing, and we were each teaching segments of the course together. It was a wonderful experience at my university, small college. I came across an article by a woman named Linda Sheely, who wrote about this tablet of the cross from Palenque, Mexico, a Mayan hieroglyphic carving with images and surrounded by hieroglyphics. Now, the Mayan hieroglyphics are not deciphered. They were not complete. There was no Rosetta Stone, so there was a lot of speculation as to what the different hieroglyphs meant, and also the entire library of the Maya, books and books on birch bark, were all burned by Diego de Landa, a missionary, and he wrote about them in his chronicles, and it was a devastating blow to the Maya chiefs that he burned huge vaults full of their birch bark documents. So the only thing remaining of the Maya are these carved stone stelae. It'd be like our entire Western civilization being destroyed, except for maybe street signs and billboards. That would be the... And so mostly what we have is the accession of rulers and kind of what might be considered more mundane, trivial, bureaucratic type record keeping. But that's what's left of the Maya, and as far as their hieroglyphic writing. But to the point here is that Linda Sheely saw an image that looked like a cross, so it's called Tablet of the Cross, and there were aspects of the iconography around it that led her to say, this looks very much like the saber tree in Mayan mythology. It's probably a symbol of the saber tree. And I thought immediately, well, it can't be a symbol. It has to be the saber tree. If they are symbolizing it, it becomes the thing. So with that idea, I did some linguistic analysis of one of the hieroglyphs, and I was able to make what I thought was a compelling case. I published the article that one of the hieroglyphs, in fact, did say 5-image tree, which they had 5. They had 4 cardinal directions in the center. So, but it was my willingness to try to think in that way, in a synthetic way, that allowed me to kind of dig into that particular analysis of the hieroglyph in the panel, the inscripted panel, with that kind of open mind. And the reward for me was just this excitement and feeling as though I had found something to be true, both in terms of what the hieroglyph was, publishable, article about it, but then also what's true about the way indigenous peoples experience the world. And once again, I want to come back and just say that I consider myself an indigenous person. I haven't grown up in that nature-based tribal way, but it's so present in my ancestral line, literally 99% of my ancestors were tribal, that I don't think it takes a lot for me to sink into it in my skin and my bones. And I often joke that, these sweat lodges and drum circles that are so appealing to a lot of people in the New Age movement, I think they would all do well to acknowledge that they're not engaging in something that belongs to tribal people, and that they're getting to be sort of visitors into a tribal way of being, that they're tapping into their own ancestry. And I think once we all begin to think a little more like that, we can begin to appreciate what that might have to teach us and offer us in terms of the healing of our earth. So with that, Tribal Jazzman Scholar will sign off. Thanks.